The dust hadn't settled from the stagecoach when Beatrice Whitmore stepped down onto the dirt street of Guthrie, Oklahoma Territory, in the summer of 1893, clutching nothing but a torn letter and a canvas bag that held everything she owned in this world. The air was thick with heat and the smell of horses, and the wooden buildings lining the main street seemed to shimmer in the afternoon sun. Beatrice stood there for a moment, her dark hair falling loose from its pins after the long journey, her pale blue dress stained with travel dust. She looked down at the letter in her hand, the paper worn soft from repeated handling, the edges ragged where it had been ripped. Only half the words remained, but they were enough to haunt her. Her former employer's son had written promises of marriage, of a life together, of love eternal. Then he had married another woman, someone of his own social standing, and when Beatrice had confronted him with the letter, he had torn it from her hands, ripped it in half, and thrown the pieces at her feet. She had kept one half, the half with his promises written in careful script, and she had left Philadelphia with $20 to her name and no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. The advertisement for a seamstress position in Guthrie had seemed like providence, but when she had arrived at the address given, she found only an empty storefront with broken windows. The position had been filled weeks ago, or perhaps it had never existed at all. Beatrice stood on that dusty street corner and felt the last of her hope drain away like water through cupped hands. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and night would fall in a few hours. The sun beat down mercilessly and she swayed slightly, realizing she had not eaten since the previous day. "Madam, you all right?" The voice came from beside her, low and concerned, with the drawn-out vowels of someone who had spent his life under open skies. Beatrice turned and found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a tanned face beneath the brim of a worn brown hat. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-lightened brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore dusty work clothes and leather chaps, and his hands, she noticed, were calloused and strong. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then swayed again. The torn letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the ground. The cowboy caught her elbow, steadying her, then bent to retrieve the letter. He glanced at it, not reading the words but seeing the torn edge, the careful handwriting, the way she reached for it with something like desperation in her eyes. "When did you last eat?" he asked, handing the letter back to her. "Yesterday morning," she admitted, hating how weak her voice sounded. "Come on," he said, his hand still gentle on her elbow. "The boarding house serves supper in an hour, but Mrs. Patterson always has something in the kitchen. I'm William Rhodes, by the way. Most folks call me Will. Beatrice Whitmore," she said, and then, because she had nothing left to lose, "I came for a job that doesn't exist and I have nowhere to stay." Will looked at her for a long moment, something like recognition flickering in his eyes, as though he understood what it meant to have the ground fall out from under you. "Well, Miss Whitmore, let's start with getting some food in you, and then we'll figure out the rest." The boarding house was a two-story building with a wide porch, painted white but weathered to gray in places. Will led her through the front door and down a hallway to a large kitchen where a woman with steel gray hair and a kind face was rolling out biscuit dough. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Whitmore. She just got in on the stage and needs a hot meal. Think you could spare something?" Mrs. Patterson took one look at Beatrice's pale face and immediately wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course, dear. Sit down before you fall down." "Will Rhodes, get her some water from the pump." Within minutes, Beatrice found herself seated at a scarred wooden table with a plate of cold chicken, biscuits, and green beans in front of her. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out and she ate quickly, gratefully. Will sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee, watching her with those steady blue eyes. "So what brought you all the way out here from?" He paused, waiting. "Philadelphia," she supplied, setting down her fork. "I was in service there as a lady's maid and seamstress." There was an advertisement for a seamstress position here in Guthrie, but when I arrived, the shop was closed. I should have written ahead to confirm, but She trailed off, not wanting to explain how desperate she had been to leave, how the walls of Philadelphia had seemed to be closing in on her. Will nodded slowly. "My sister Emma runs the general store with her husband. She's been talking about needing someone to help with the sewing and mending. Folks out here are always needing clothes repaired or altered, and she doesn't have time to keep up with it all. Can't promise it would pay much to start, but it's something." Hope flickered in Beatrice's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "Really? She would consider hiring me?" "Let's go talk to her," Will said, standing and settling his hat back on his head. "Shop's just down the street." They walked together through the late afternoon heat, past the saloon with its tinny piano music drifting out into the street, past the livery stable and the sheriff's office. Beatrice was acutely aware of Will beside her, his long stride deliberately shortened to match her pace, his presence somehow reassuring in this strange new place. The general store was a large building filled with everything from bolts of fabric to saddles to sacks of flour. A woman who looked like a feminine version of Will stood behind the counter, her light brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had the same blue eyes, the same strong features, though her face lit up with curiosity when she saw them enter. "Will, and who's this?" "Emma, this is Miss Beatrice Whitmore. She just arrived in town expecting a seamstress position that doesn't exist. I told her you might have worked for someone with a needle and thread." Emma came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, assessing Beatrice with a shrewd but not unkind gaze. "You know your way around a sewing machine." "I can use one, but I'm better by hand," Beatrice said honestly. "I worked for the Morrison family in Philadelphia for 3 years, maintaining their wardrobes, making alterations, creating new pieces. Before that, I apprenticed with a dressmaker for 2 years." Emma's eyebrows rose. "The Morrison family. They're quite prominent, aren't they?" "Yes, madam," Beatrice said quietly, not wanting to discuss why she had left such a prestigious position. Emma seemed to understand that there was a story there, but she did not push. Instead, she walked to a corner of the store where several baskets sat overflowing with clothes. "I've got 3 weeks of mending backed up and at least 4 people waiting for alterations. If you can make a dent in this pile, I'll pay you $2 a week to start, plus meals at the boarding house. If you're as good as you say, we can talk about increasing that." $2 a week was not much, but it was something, and Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "I won't disappoint you." "I believe you," Emma said with a smile. "Will, take her back to Mrs. Patterson and tell her to put Miss Whitmore in the room at the end of the hall. I'll settle up with her later." As they walked back to the boarding house, the sun beginning to sink toward the horizon and paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Beatrice felt something shift inside her. The day that had started in despair now held possibility. "Thank you," she said to Will as they reached the boarding house steps. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me." Will pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. "We all need help sometimes, Miss Whitmore. I'm just glad I was there." He hesitated, then added, "I saw that letter you were holding. Can't help but think someone tore it up on purpose. Whatever story that letter was trying to tell, maybe it wasn't the right one." Beatrice pulled the torn paper from her pocket, looking down at the promises written there, promises that had been broken before they were ever spoken aloud. "No," she agreed softly. "It wasn't the right story at all." "Well then," Will said, his voice gentle, Maybe it's time to write a new one." She looked up at him, this cowboy who had shown her kindness when she had nothing, and felt something warm unfold in her chest. "Maybe it is," she said. Will smiled, and it transformed his face, making him seem younger, more open. "I'll see you at supper, Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Patterson sets a fine table. Please call me Beatrice," she said. "Beatrice," he repeated as though testing the name on his tongue. "I'll see you at supper, Beatrice." She watched him walk away, his boots making soft sounds in the dust, and then she went inside to find her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. Someone, probably Mrs. Patterson, had left a pitcher of fresh water and a clean towel. Beatrice set her canvas bag on the bed and pulled out the torn letter one more time. She read the words again, the promises that had never meant anything, the declarations of love from a man who had been playing a game while she had been risking her heart. Then she walked to the window, opened it, and held the letter out into the breeze. For a moment she just held it there, feeling the wind tug at the paper. Then she let go. The torn letter fluttered away on the wind, tumbling end over end down the street until it disappeared from sight. Beatrice watched it go and felt lighter than she had in months. That story was over. And maybe, just maybe, a new one was beginning. Supper that evening was a lively affair, with the boarding house dining room full of ranch hands, shopkeepers, and travelers. Will sat across from Beatrice, and she learned that he worked as a foreman on the Double R Ranch just outside of town, that he was 26 years old, and that he had come to Oklahoma Territory 5 years ago when the land was opened for settlement. Emma was his older sister by 2 years, and they had come west together after their parents died in a fire back in Missouri. "It was just the two of us," Will explained, passing her the bowl of mashed potatoes. Emma wanted a fresh start, somewhere she could build something of her own. "I wanted wide open spaces and the chance to work with horses. We came during the land run of '89, staked a claim, and built a life here." "You still have your claim?" Beatrice asked. "Sold it to my boss, Tom Reynolds, and used the money to help Emma and her husband Robert buy the store. I prefer working the ranch to trying to farm, and Emma's a natural shopkeeper. Worked out well for both of us." Emma, sitting next to her husband Robert, a quiet man with gentle eyes, leaned across the table. "Will's too modest. He's the best horseman in the territory, and he saved up every penny to help us with that store. We'd have never managed without him." Will's ears turned slightly red. "Family helps family," he said simply. Beatrice felt a pang of longing. She had no family left. Her mother had died when she was 12, her father when she was 16. She had been alone for the past 6 years, making her way as best she could. The easy affection between Will and Emma, the way they looked out for each other, made her chest ache with what might have been. After supper, Emma walked her back to the store to show her the sewing supplies and explain what needed to be done. "Most of it's simple mending," Emma said, lighting a lamp as dusk settled over the town. "But there's also Mrs. Henderson's dress that needs taking in, and Mr. Chen's suit jacket that needs the sleeves shortened. Take your time with those. I'd rather you do it right than do it fast." "I will," Beatrice promised, already examining the pile of work with a practiced eye. This she knew. This she could do. Fabric and thread, needle and scissors. These were tools she understood, a language she spoke fluently. She worked by lamplight until her eyes grew tired, finishing 3 pairs of mended trousers and starting on a torn shirt. When she finally returned to the boarding house, the sky was full of stars, brighter than she had ever seen them in the city. She stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the night air, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling down for the night. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Will's voice came from the shadows at the end of the porch. He was sitting on the railing, his hat pushed back, looking up at the sky. "I've never seen so many stars," Beatrice admitted, moving to stand near him. "In Philadelphia, there's too much smoke and light." "Out here you can see forever," Will said. "When I'm at the ranch, sometimes I sleep outside just to look up at them. Makes you feel small, but in a good way. Like your problems aren't as big as they seem." Beatrice thought of the torn letter, now lost somewhere in the Oklahoma dust. "Yes," she agreed. "I suppose they're not." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and Beatrice was struck by how easy it was to be near him, how she did not feel the need to fill the quiet with meaningless chatter. Will Rhodes had a stillness about him, a calm confidence that came from knowing who he was and what he was capable of. "Can I ask you something?" Will said after a while. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to. All right. That letter you had. Someone broke a promise to you, didn't they?" Beatrice drew in a breath, considering how much to tell him. Then she decided that here in the darkness, with the stars overhead and this kind man beside her, she could speak the truth. "His name was Richard Morrison. He was the son of the family I worked for. He pursued me for months, wrote me letters, told me he loved me, promised we would marry. I believed him. I was foolish enough to believe him." She paused, her throat tight. "Then I learned he was engaged to a woman of his own social class. When I confronted him with his letter, he tore it up and told me I was a fool if I thought someone like him would marry a servant." Will's hands tightened on the porch rail, his knuckles going white in the moonlight. "He's the fool," he said, his voice hard. "And a coward. A real man keeps his promises." "I should have known better," Beatrice said. "I should have seen it for what it was." "He lied to you," Will said firmly. "That's not your fault. You trusted someone and he betrayed that trust. The shame is his, not yours." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes, but they were different from the tears she had shed over Richard Morrison. These were tears of release, of being heard and believed. "Thank you," she whispered. Will turned to look at her, his face serious in the moonlight. "You're starting fresh here, Beatrice. Whatever happened back in Philadelphia, it doesn't have to define who you are now. You get to write your own story." "That's what you said earlier," she said, managing a small smile. "About writing a new story together." "Did I say together?" Will asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "I meant you get to write a new story. Though I suppose if you needed someone to help with the writing, I'd be willing." "You'd help me write my story?" Beatrice asked, something warm spreading through her chest. "Well, maybe we could write one together," Will said softly, "if you wanted." Beatrice looked up at him, this cowboy who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than Richard Morrison had in months of false courtship. "I think I'd like that," she said. Will smiled, and the warmth in his eyes made her heart beat faster. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll write a new story together." The next few weeks fell into a pleasant rhythm. Beatrice rose early each morning, ate breakfast at the boarding house, and then walked to the general store where she spent her days sewing. Emma was easy to work with, appreciative of Beatrice's skill and willing to let her take the time needed to do quality work. The pile of mending gradually shrank, and word spread through town that there was a seamstress at the general store who could work miracles with a needle. Will came by the store most days, usually with some excuse about needing supplies or checking on his sister. But Beatrice noticed how his visits coincided with her breaks, how he always seemed to have time to walk her back to the boarding house for lunch or supper. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from horses to books to dreams for the future. She learned that he wanted his own ranch someday, a place where he could breed and train horses, that he loved the work but wanted to build something that was truly his. "What about you?" he asked one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the store, sharing a bottle of cold tea Emma had sent out with them. "What do you dream about?" Beatrice considered the question. A month ago, she would have said she dreamed of security, of a place where she belonged, of someone who truly loved her. But now those dreams were becoming more specific, taking on the shape of this town, this life, this man beside her. "I dream of a home," she said carefully. "Not just a place to live, but a real home, somewhere I belong, and work that matters, that helps people, and—" She trailed off, suddenly shy, Will prompted gently. "And someone to share it with," she finished. "Someone honest and kind, someone who keeps his promises." Will was quiet for a moment, then he reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Someone like that would be lucky to share a home with you," he said. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm, but she did not pull her hand away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his and held on. They courted properly, despite the fact that courtship looked different in Guthrie than it had in Philadelphia. There were no fancy restaurants or theaters, but Will took her to the town's social on Saturday nights, where they danced to fiddle music in the community hall. He taught her to ride, spending patient hours showing her how to sit in the saddle, how to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts of weight and gentle pressure from her legs. They went on picnics by the creek that ran through the Reynolds ranch, spreading a blanket under the cottonwood trees and talking until the sun began to set. On one such afternoon, about 6 weeks after Beatrice had arrived in Guthrie, Will brought a basket of food his ranch cook had prepared and led her to a spot where the creek widened into a clear pool. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and dragonflies darted over the surface. They ate fried chicken and biscuits, fresh tomatoes from Emma's garden, and peach pie that was still warm from the oven. "This is perfect," Beatrice sighed, leaning back on her hands and tilting her face up to the sun. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Will admitted. He was lying on his side, propped up on one elbow, watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Beatrice, there's something I want to tell you." She looked over at him, struck by the serious tone in his voice. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "Actually, that's not quite right. I've already fallen. I think I started falling that first day when you were standing on the street corner looking lost and brave at the same time." Beatrice's heart felt too big for her chest. "Will, I know it hasn't been that long," he continued. "And I know you came here running from someone who hurt you. I don't want to rush you or make you feel pressured, but I need you to know how I feel. I love you, Beatrice. I love your strength and your skill and the way you see the good in people. I love how you're building a new life for yourself out of nothing but determination and talent. I love talking to you and being near you and thinking about a future that has you in it." Tears were running down Beatrice's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to admit it, afraid to trust my own heart again. But Will, you're nothing like Richard Morrison. You're honest and true, and you make me feel safe in a way I've never felt before. I love you." Will reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, almost tentative. Then she leaned into him and the kiss deepened, full of promise and longing and the sweet certainty that this was right. This was real. This was the beginning of the story they were writing together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Will rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's soon, but I'm sure about this. I'm sure about you. Marry me, Beatrice." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 6 weeks later in the small white church on the edge of town. Emma stood up with Beatrice, having helped her make a simple but beautiful dress from cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and sleeves. Robert stood with Will, and half the town packed into the pews to witness the union. Beatrice had never felt more beautiful than she did walking down that aisle toward Will, who stood at the front with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about two people joining their lives together. When it came time for the vows, Will took both of Beatrice's hands in his and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be honest with you, to work beside you, to build a home with you. I promise to keep my promises." Beatrice's voice shook with emotion as she made her own vows. "I promise to love you, to trust you, to stand with you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner and your friend, to build a life with you, to write our story together." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Will he could kiss his bride, the church erupted in cheers and applause. Will kissed her thoroughly, then swept her up in his arms and carried her down the aisle while everyone laughed and threw rice. The reception was held at the community hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food brought by what seemed like everyone in the county. There was dancing and music, toasts and laughter. Emma hugged Beatrice tightly and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sister. I'm so glad Will found you." Tom Reynolds, Will's boss, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes, pulled Will aside for a conversation that seemed serious. Beatrice watched with curiosity, seeing Tom clap Will on the shoulder, seeing the surprised joy on her new husband's face. When Will came back to her, he was grinning from ear to ear. "What was that about?" she asked. "I'll tell you later," he promised. "Right now, I want to dance with my wife." They had taken a room at the hotel for their wedding night, a luxury after the simple accommodations of the boarding house. Emma and some of the other women had decorated it with wildflowers, and there was a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the dresser. When they finally escaped the reception and made their way to the hotel, both of them giddy with happiness and exhaustion, Will stopped in the doorway and looked at Beatrice with such tenderness that she felt her eyes fill with tears again. "What is it?" she asked. "I just want to remember this moment," he said, "the beginning of our life together." He carried her over the threshold, setting her down gently on the other side. They stood there in the lamplight, suddenly shy with each other despite all the hours they had spent talking and laughing and planning their future. "Will," Beatrice said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm not afraid, not with you." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and they began to learn each other in new ways, with patience and tenderness and growing passion. It was nothing like what Richard Morrison had pressured her toward in Stolen Moments, encounters that had left her feeling ashamed and used. This was beautiful and right. 2 people joining together in love and commitment, taking their time, finding joy in each touch and whisper. Later, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, Will traced lazy patterns on her shoulder and told her about his conversation with Tom Reynolds. "He's getting older and wants to slow down. He offered to sell me 100 acres of the ranch, the western section where the best grassland is, along with 50 head of cattle and 20 horses. He's giving me a good price and letting me pay it off over 5 years. Beatrice, we can have our own place, our own ranch." Beatrice propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him in the dim light from the street that filtered through the curtains. "That's wonderful, but can we afford it? Even with a good price, that's a lot of money." "I've been saving for years," Will said. "And with your income from sewing, plus what I'll make running the ranch, we can do it. It won't be easy at first. We'd need to build a house, and for the first year or so it would be small, just a few rooms. But it would be ours. Would you be willing to live out on the ranch away from town?" "I'd live anywhere with you," Beatrice said, meaning it. "But Will, I don't know anything about ranching. I grew up in the city." "What if I can't do it?" "You'll learn," he he said confidently. "Just like you've learned everything else you've set your mind to. And you can still sew. Lots of ranch wives take in sewing to help make ends meet. Emma can send work out to you, and you can come into town for fittings when you need to." Beatrice thought about it, imagining a home of their own, a place they built together from the ground up. It was daunting, but it was also exactly the kind of fresh start she had been looking for when she stepped off that stagecoach 2 months ago. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's build our ranch." Will pulled her down for a kiss. "We'll write the best story," he murmured against her lips. The best story there ever was. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Will signed the papers with Tom Reynolds, and they became the proud owners of the W Cross R Ranch, named for their combined initials. Tom's ranch hands helped them start building a house on a gentle rise that overlooked the creek. It was simple, just 4 rooms, a main room that served as kitchen and living space, a bedroom, and 2 smaller rooms they left unfinished for now, but planned to turn into a proper parlor and additional bedrooms later. Beatrice divided her time between working on the house and keeping up with her sewing. She made curtains for their windows, quilts for their bed, tablecloths and napkins and dish towels. She also took in as much work as Emma could send her way, saving every penny toward furniture and supplies. Will worked from dawn to dusk, building fences, caring for the cattle and horses, breaking ground for a kitchen garden Beatrice wanted to plant in the spring. They moved into the house in late November, just as the first snow began to fall. It was not finished yet, with gaps in the walls that Will stuffed with newspaper and rags until he could properly chink them, and the floors were rough-hewn boards that gave splinters if you were not careful. But it was theirs, and that first night, as they lay together in their own bed in their own house on their own land, Beatrice felt a contentment so deep it seemed to fill every part of her. "Happy?" Will asked, pulling her close against the chill. "More than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "Will, do you ever think about how different my life would be if I hadn't gotten on that stagecoach, if I'd stayed in Philadelphia?" "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "And then I thank God you got on that stagecoach and came to Guthrie. Thank God you were standing on that street corner the day I rode into town. Thank God you gave me a chance even though you had every reason not to trust anyone. You made it easy to trust you," Beatrice said. "You kept your promises. You still do." "Always will," Will said, kissing the top of her head. "That's a promise too." The winter was hard, colder than anything Beatrice had experienced in Philadelphia. Snow fell heavy and often, and there were days when they could not leave the house because the wind blew so fierce and the temperature dropped so low. But they had laid in supplies, and Will had taught Beatrice how to tend the animals in their small barn. She learned to milk the cow they had bought, to gather eggs from the chickens, to throw hay to the horses. She also learned the rhythms of ranch life, the way the days started before dawn and ended after dark, the way success was measured in healthy animals and full feed bins, the way neighbors helped each other through the hard times. When one of their cows got stuck in a frozen creek bed, Tom Reynolds and his hands came to help pull her out. When Emma took sick with influenza, Beatrice rode into town despite the cold and nursed her sister-in-law back to health. In the long evenings by the fire, Will taught Beatrice to play checkers, and she taught him to appreciate poetry, reading aloud from a book of Whitman she had brought from Philadelphia. They talked about their plans for the ranch, about adding more cattle in the spring, about breeding their best horses. They talked about the future in concrete terms, as something they were building together day by day. It was during one of those evenings in late February, with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth, that Beatrice realized she had not had her monthly courses in 6 weeks. She sat very still, her sewing forgotten in her lap, counting back the weeks in her head. 6 weeks, maybe 7. Beatrice, you all right? Will looked up from the piece of leather he was working into a new bridle. I think I might be expecting, she said quietly. Will's hands went still. Expecting? You mean a baby? Yes, she said, meeting his eyes across the firelight. I'm not certain yet, but I think so. Will set down the leather and bridle and crossed to her in 3 long strides. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. A baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, suddenly uncertain. They had not talked about children yet, had not planned for this so soon. Happy, Will laughed, and there were tears in his eyes. Beatrice, I'm more than happy. I'm overjoyed. We're going to be parents. He laid his hand gently on her stomach, and even though there was nothing to feel yet, the gesture made Beatrice's heart swell. We're going to need to finish those extra rooms, she said, smiling through her own tears. And I'll need to make baby clothes, and we'll need a cradle. I'll build the best cradle, Will promised. The baby will have everything, and so will you. Whatever you need, Beatrice, I'll make sure you have it. I just need you, she said softly. You and this life we're building together. Emma confirmed the pregnancy in March when the snow finally began to melt and travel became easier. She hugged Beatrice fiercely and declared herself thrilled to be an aunt. Do you want me to be there when the baby comes? She asked. I helped deliver 3 babies last year, and Mrs. Patterson has delivered dozens. We'll take good care of you. I'd like that, Beatrice said, grateful to know she would have helped when the time came. As spring turned to summer, Beatrice's body changed, her belly growing round and full. Will was attentive and careful, insisting she rest more, taking on extra work around the house so she would not overdo it. He finished the 2 extra rooms, turning one into a proper bedroom for them with new furniture he built himself, and a real glass window he bought from a traveling merchant. The other room became a nursery, painted pale yellow and furnished with the cradle he had promised, carved from oak and sanded so smooth there was not a single rough edge. The baby came in late October, on a cool, clear morning when the leaves on the cottonwoods by the creek were turning gold. Beatrice's labor started just after dawn, and Will rode hard into town to fetch Emma and Mrs. Patterson. The next 12 hours were the longest of Will's life as he paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Beatrice's cries and the murmured voices of the women attending her. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, he heard a new sound, a thin wail that grew stronger and more insistent. The bedroom door opened and Emma appeared, tired but smiling. Come meet your son, she said. Will entered the room with his heart pounding. Beatrice lay propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a quilt she had made. She looked up when he came in, and her smile was like the sun rising. Will, meet our son, she said softly. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. The baby's eyes were closed, his mouth working as though he was already searching for milk. Will reached out one finger and the baby's hand closed around it, holding on with surprising strength. He's beautiful, Will whispered, his voice choked with emotion. You're beautiful, Beatrice. I love you so much. I love you too, she said. What should we name him? They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Now, looking down at his son, Will thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. What about James? He suggested. It was my father's name, James William Rhodes. James, Beatrice repeated, trying it out. James Rhodes, I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one. The baby opened his eyes then, unfocused blue eyes that seemed to look right at them, and Beatrice laughed softly. "He's going to have your eyes," she said to Will. "And your determination, I expect," Will said, kissing her forehead gently. "The world better watch out." The first year of James's life was exhausting but joyful. Beatrice discovered she loved being a mother, loved the weight of her son in her arms, the way he smiled when he saw her face, the sweet, milky smell of him. She sewed less for a while, focusing on caring for James and managing the house, but by the time he was 6 months old, she was taking in work again, sewing while he napped in the cradle Will set up next to her chair. The ranch prospered. Their cattle herd grew, and Will's horses gained a reputation for being well-trained and even-tempered. They were able to make their payments to Tom Reynolds on time and even saved a little. Life was not easy, but it was good, and Beatrice marveled at how far she had come from that desperate woman standing on a dusty street corner with a torn letter in her hand. She thought about Richard Morrison sometimes, but without the pain that had once accompanied those memories. He was part of her old story, the one that had ended. This was her new story, the one she was writing with Will, and it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. When James was 2 years old, Beatrice found herself expecting again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because Emma was nearby to answer questions and provide reassurance. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Emma Rhodes, was born on a warm spring morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair. Will adored his daughter instantly and completely. Beatrice often found him in the nursery just watching Sarah sleep, or carrying her around the ranch showing her the horses and cattle, as though she could understand his words. James, now a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. The years passed in the way years do when life is full and satisfying. They added on to the house, building a proper parlor and another bedroom. They bought more land from Tom Reynolds when he finally decided to retire and move to town. The W-Cross-R Ranch became known throughout the territory, and Will was sought out for his expertise in training horses. Beatrice's sewing business grew as well. She took on apprentices, teaching young women the skills she had learned, and eventually opened a small shop in Guthrie that she managed with Emma's help. It felt good to be building something of her own while still being a full partner in the ranch. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, they celebrated with a party at the ranch, inviting all their friends and neighbors. Tom Reynolds came, walking carefully now with a cane but still sharp as ever. Emma and Robert came with their 3 children. The community they had built over the years gathered to mark the occasion. And as Beatrice looked around at all the familiar faces, the children playing, the adults talking and laughing, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Beatrice and Will sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars come out one by one. It was something they still did regularly, even after 14 years of marriage, sitting together in comfortable silence and watching the endless sky. "You ever think about that first day?" Will asked. "When you stepped off the stagecoach?" "All the time," Beatrice admitted. "I was so lost and scared. I had nothing but a torn letter and $20. And now look at us," Will said, gesturing at the house, the barn, the land stretching out around them. "Look at what we built." "We wrote a good story," Beatrice said, taking his hand. "The best story." "It's not over yet," Will said, squeezing her fingers. "We've got a lot more chapters to write." "I'm looking forward to everyone," Beatrice said. They sat there as the stars wheeled overhead. 2 people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had chosen love and trust and hard work, who had built a life together from nothing but hope and determination. The torn letter was long gone, lost in the Oklahoma dust, and in its place was something real and solid and true, a story they had written together, a story that was still being written with every day that passed. James grew into a tall young man with his father's way with horses and his mother's quiet determination. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Will's hair turned gray at the temples and Beatrice found reading glasses helpful for her sewing. Sarah, spirited and bright, divided her time between helping her mother in the shop and riding the ranch with her father and brother. When James turned 20, he announced his intention to marry Lucy Thompson, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was held at the W-R Ranch on a perfect summer day, and Beatrice watched her son make his vows and thought about the vows she and Will had spoken so many years ago. Some things, she thought, were worth repeating across generations. Love, commitment, honesty, partnership, these were the values they had built their life on, and these were the values they had passed to their children. Sarah married 2 years later, a young man named Patrick O'Brien who worked as a teacher in Guthrie. The wedding was smaller, held in the church in town, but no less joyful. Beatrice and Will danced at their daughter's wedding, moving easily together after so many years, and Beatrice leaned her head on Will's shoulder and felt completely content. The grandchildren came, as grandchildren do. James and Lucy had 4 children in quick succession, 2 boys and 2 girls, all of them wild and energetic and perpetually underfoot at the ranch. Sarah and Patrick had 3 quieter children who loved books and music. The W-R Ranch was often filled with the sounds of children playing, of laughter and running feet, and Beatrice, who had been so alone for so long before coming to Guthrie, reveled in the noise and chaos. On a fall evening in 1920, 27 years after Beatrice had first stepped off that stagecoach, she and Will sat once again on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange and red. They were older now, both in their 50s, with lined faces and graying hair. But Will's eyes were still the same startling blue, and Beatrice's smile still made his heart beat faster. "I was thinking today," Beatrice said, "about that torn letter, about Richard Morrison and how devastated I was when he betrayed me." "Why were you thinking about that?" Will asked, surprised. She so rarely mentioned that part of her past anymore. "Because I realized that if he hadn't broken my heart, I never would have left Philadelphia. I never would have come to Guthrie. I never would have met you." She turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "That torn letter, those broken promises, they led me to you, to this life, to everything that matters." Will reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers just as they had that first time, all those years ago outside Emma's store. "Some stories have to end," he said softly, "so better ones can begin." "We wrote a beautiful story," Beatrice said. "We're still writing it," Will corrected. "Every day we're still writing it together." They sat there as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear, the same stars they had watched together for nearly 3 decades. Around them, their ranch thrived, their children and grandchildren flourished, their love endured. The woman who had come with only a torn letter had found more than she ever dreamed possible, and the cowboy who had seen something brave and lost in her eyes that first day had been right when he said they would write a new story together. It was the best story either of them could have imagined, full of hard work and joy, challenges and triumphs, love and family and partnership. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Beatrice leaned her head on Will's shoulder and thought about all the chapters they had written, all the memories they had made, all the years they had shared. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Will replied. "Always have, always will. That's a promise." And unlike the promises written in that torn letter so many years ago, this was a promise that had been kept every single day, in every word and action, in every shared sunrise and whispered conversation, in every moment of laughter and every tear wiped away, in the children they had raised and the life they had built. The torn letter was gone, scattered to dust by the Oklahoma wind decades ago. But the story that had replaced it, the story Will and Beatrice had written together with their lives and their love, that story was solid and true and real. It was written in the land they had worked, the house they had built, the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. It was written in their hearts, in the bond that time had only strengthened, in the love that had grown deeper and richer with every passing year. As night fell over the W Cross R ranch, bringing with it the familiar sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and horses shifting in the barn, Will and Beatrice Rhodes sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full. Two people who had found each other when they both needed it most and had chosen, every single day since then, to keep writing their story together. And it was, without question, the very best story either of them could have hoped to tell.